Again, my name is Chris Shipley. Oh my gosh, I'm the executive director of public policy for INCOMPAS. I'm not an attorney and policy advisor anymore. It's my pleasure today to welcome two policy giants to our stage to talk about the 12 gigahertz band. When you go to law school and you study communications law, there are celebrities and FCC commissioners are those folks. And so I'm honored to welcome former Commissioner Mike O'Reilly and former Commissioner Harold Furchtgott-Roth to talk about the 12 gigahertz band. Commissioner O'Reilly, you were nominated by President Obama in 2013. You served until 2020. And Commissioner Furchtgott-Roth, you were nominated by President Clinton in 1997, served until 2001. And I appreciate both of you being here. Both of you, since you've left the commission, have your own consulting groups, and you have obviously done your research on 12 gigahertz. And so appreciate you being here to talk about your interest and I believe support for this proceeding. Commissioner O'Reilly, let me start with you. Sure. I'll just lay a little bit of groundwork here on the 12 gigahertz band, but the band itself is authorized for three services. We've got direct broadcast satellite, we have NGSO, a fixed satellite service, and then we've got multi-channel video and data distribution service. In 2016, those MVDDS licensees originally petitioned the FCC to reform the rules in that band. And then in January of 2021, then Chairman Ajit Pai issued a notice of proposed rulemaking, seeking comment on whether or not to modify the band to expand it for more flexible uses. So, Commissioner O'Reilly, your time at the FCC sort of coincided with much of that history, and I was wondering if you could sort of start us off by giving your recollections of the proceeding, including that original MVDDS request, and sort of what encouraged the commission to seek further comment in 2021.
Well, sure, and thanks so much for having me. And I want to be careful. I can't talk about too many of these,
sure.
the nitty gritty of conversations that the commission is still prohibited on some of those things. And I should say there's this belief. I had left in December. Item comes, it's the last item pretty much that Ajit deals with in January before he exits. There's this belief that it was, it's Ajit's item, but spectrum policy has always been bipartisan and always been across the aisle. And so this is not one administration versus the other. The timing of when items happen, just falls when they're ready. I was walking out the door, but I had done a number of years on this issue. Obviously, one of them was during COVID, so I didn't get to meet with a lot of people, but I did some Zooming. But for a number of years, we've been talking about this issue. How can you improve, spectrum sharing? How can you approve new bands for wireless services to feed the pipeline that the Assistant Secretary Harris talked about? Just before, how do you make sure there's, and 12 gigahertz makes all the sense in the world from that time. I think the issue we explored when I was still at the commission was, can the sharing happen? Does the math work? And that would have been my question. Show me the math. And that's what OET is really good at, working through those issues.
Yeah, that's a great point to sort of where we are now. I mean, we've, INCOMPAS leads or co-leads the 5G for 12 gigahertz coalition. And as we've talked to members of the FCC and some of their leadership offices, we've heard that OET is evaluating, one of the densest technical records, that they've seen. So, what are your all's impression of the record thus far, and what kinds of considerations is OET making as it sort of determines the path forward? Commissioner Furchtgott-Roth.
Well, thank you, and thank you to INCOMPAS for inviting me
Sure.
today. I can't obviously speak for OET, but I know they have a very dense record. The record that I've seen indicates that lots of services can coexist, and the issues that, as Commissioner O'Reilly mentioned, that are being described as sharing. I have a different vocabulary. I think the issue really is just assigning property rights and letting the licensees sort it out. If I have, I own a home, if one of my children had a drum set and made a lot of noise, that would be infringing on my neighbor. It doesn't mean that I can't own a property and that my neighbor can't own. These things get worked out. They get worked out in market systems. Okay, is this better? I'll try to swallow it next time. Okay. And so I think there really is an economic issue here. It's not just an engineering issue. The issue should not be simply reduced to matters of interference. And as I understand it, there really isn't much in the way of interference. The issue is, how do we get this spectrum put in use? Spectrum is, in my view, the most important asset for the development of the world over the past 3 decades. If you look at World Bank studies, in the mid-1980s, between 30 and 40% of the world's population was making less than $100 a year. By just a few years ago, that number had been reduced to about 10%. That is the greatest increase in human welfare in human history. To have 30% of the world's population to be that much better off than their parents were. We've got a long way to go, but unless and until we get spectrum policy right, we're going to be keeping not people in this room not well off. We're going to be keeping the poorest people in the world from getting the benefits that they have seen. And it's largely, and I'm quite convinced of this, it's been largely because of getting wireless services out to the world. And we need to build on that. And the way we're going to build on that is to get spectrum put to better use.
Is Commissioner O'Reilly live, everyone?
Can you hear me?
Great.
Okay.
Okay.
Want to take that one too?
Please.
Well, look at, I've been a big fan of OET prior to being at the commission. I've always considered one of the crown jewels of the agency, that spectrum auctions. There's probably some others that I would put in the not good category, but I won't mention them. I'll call them out here. So I really applaud the work that they do. They tend to be a little bit more conservative. I've tried over the years to push them on certain things. Yeah. I wasn't successful on some items. And they want to be mindful, and they do the hard work. The record, in my opinion, is pretty full, and it seems to be, and I leave it to them since I'm not there making decisions, but it seems to be ready for decision in the near term. Depending on this, putting all the pieces together on the schedule, I leave up to the chairwoman's office. But it seems to be that we're at an inflection point in relatively near soon where we can move forward with some decisions.
Yeah. As I mentioned, both of you have done some analysis of this issue. I read your blog, Commissioner O'Reilly. I've seen some of the economic analysis that you've done, Commissioner Scott-Roth. What immediate opportunities generally, I think, does the 12 gigahertz band present? What are some of the economic benefits as well?
The economic benefits are immense, and this is the band that is unencumbered in terms of there are no federal users. We don't have to, Scott Harris doesn't have to worry about federal users being in the way. And this has great opportunities for development of mobile broadband services or fixed broadband services for that matter. This is the easiest band that could be the next band of spectrum for the FCC to develop.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that perspective. I mean, you think about it, and certainly in terms of unencumbered from federal agencies, with the bands that people talk about today, lower 3 gigahertz, 7 and 8, name the circumstance. You have to work through mostly Department of Defense, really heavy lifting that Scott has to do to make things, keep the trains moving in the same direction when they can. God bless them. But here you have a situation where you don't have that. You don't have any federal agencies, and you're talking about 500 megahertz of what I consider mid-band. When I first started, he's a young pup many years ago under mentorship of my friend here. Mid-band wasn't to the degree that we are. We're 3 gigahertz is kind of mid. Was the cap of mid. Now we're in upwards of 24 gigahertz. But certainly this is in a ripe spot where the equipment ecosystem can quickly develop. There's great interest from the industry. To me, this is exactly what's needed. And it's, and I wrote about this. Tell me where else is easier to move 500 megahertz for new wireless services while still making sure that the existing incumbents can be fully protected from harmful interference. That's a win-win, and we should take it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I could, because I'm not sure there is another opportunity like this one. With satellite and terrestrial already in the band, satellite and MVDTS are they've entered the band knowing that DBS kind of is the the primary user for the band. But the 12 gigahertz band sort of in a way is kind of an example of how a band can be shared between private interests and commercial users. Even with rule changes, can the 12 gigahertz really be a model for how we share spectrum, employ spectrum sharing technologies going forward? And then I guess the larger question is can this ban have an even larger, does it have larger implications for US spectrum sharing policy?
I've written about this for 20 years or so. I wrote a major paper about 10 years ago called Open Spectrum that focuses on essentially assigning rights and then letting market forces take care of it. I'm not a big fan of the word sharing. It doesn't have a lot of legal meaning. It's not how contracts are written. But the concept is sharing. But it's actually much more important, in my view, to assign the rights and then let the private parties negotiate and sort out how they're going to use the same resource by contract. I think that's actually far more important than having everything go back to the government and having sort of a government may I situation, which is not very efficient.
Well, I might answer this without offending my friend. Number of bands have been pointed out as being the next sharing model, right? People talk about CBRS, of course, is out there. There's a couple, 37 could be the new one, or lower 3 gigahertz can be a new one. There's different ideas that people have. And I want to be respectful of all those. This certainly could be, depending on how things play out. But I don't necessarily. I want to be respectful. I don't really care if it's a model. I want it to work.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out how can I get spectrum in my current. How do I get spectrum into the marketplace? That was part of my old job. It's carries through to my current role. We need more spectrum, more frequencies for new wireless services. That is, undoubtedly true. And how do we make that happen? And I think this is one band that can do that. And if it serves to help here and other places, absolutely great. If it serves here but doesn't work in other circumstances, that's okay too. Let's just make sure it works here.
Yeah, we've heard from a number of representatives from the FCC today. Commissioner Symington, is Joel still here? Joel was around for a second. The wireless Bureau Chairman Joel Tobin-Blatt talking a little bit about the new notice of inquiry on 12.7 to 13.25. Obviously, sort of complementary, I think, to the work that's being examined in 12.2 to 12.7. And their interest in kind of using that band for mobile broadband, other flexible uses. Can we infer anything from this move about how the FCC is thinking about either the larger 1050 megahertz or the band's long-term prospects, either band for terrestrial service, and what opportunities are created by having two adjacent bands potentially being used for terrestrial 5G?
Well, it's a great opportunity to have 1 gigahertz of spectrum. It will attract a lot of equipment vendors to invest the resources to make this band commercially accessible. 500 is great. 1050 is even better. And this is a band, again, that there is no federal user interference. And it has great propagation characteristics. It's in a nice sweet spot. It's low enough frequency to have good propagation characteristics. And yet not too high up to have building penetration problems that much higher frequencies have. So it's a really good spot, and I think 1050 gigahertz 1050 megahertz will be great.
I would agree with that. I mean, what can we infer? I mean, we can infer certainly that the current commission, and I don't speak for them, and sees this as mid-band spectrum, right? So that and they see it as valuable. At least certainly 13 gigahertz is valuable for potential new 5G services. It's as I read some of the comments and where they may go with it. So I think it's very complementary. Use your word in terms of where 12 and 13 can go together. Building, we've had to deal with this. How big of blocks do you need as you go up the ladder? You used to do small slices, and you get to now you need 100 megahertz to contiguous for 5G services. And as you go up, you're going to need more. So you're talking about 1,050. That's more opportunity and really can feed the ecosystem for what wireless can bring in the future.
Mhm. And just a quick programming note, by the way, I noticed on your agendas today that this only ran until 4 o'clock. We're actually going until 4:15 here, and then the next panel will go 4:15 to 5 o'clock. So if you're looking at your agenda and wondering why we're not off, we've got 15 extra minutes. And
a lot of sad faces out there, right?
And we're going to need it. I mean, is there any reason why the commission can't kind of aggressively sort of, go after both bands? Is there any reason not to do so?
No, time's wasted.
Yeah.
They should go for it. And both bands of spectrum are underutilized today, and it really should move forward.
Well, and if your question is simultaneously, I would say, yes and no. Yes, they should go for both bands, but I don't want them going simultaneously. I think 12 is ready.
Right.
I think 13 is we're at an NOI stage, and God bless the current commission. But even if most optimistic and get an NPRM, it's not on this month's agenda. At least if I read, it could, even if there was an NPRM next month, an NPRM to final order is a year. That's being really, really fast at the commission. Maybe they can expedite. God bless them. Maybe they found new wings after I left. But that's fair. So I don't want to wait another year to kind of line these up. I want to move forward as soon as we can. I absolutely think that both can move and be productive for that purpose.
Right. That's great. I wanted to ask about mid-band spectrum. I think more generally about the spectrum pipeline. As efforts to deploy 5G have ramped up, we've seen industry bemoan the lack of available mid-band spectrum. I think we've mentioned this just a little bit. And mid-band, as Commissioner Furchtgott-Roth has said, has become a target for 5G because of its coverage capacity, its balanced coverage, its capacity characteristics. And expanding the band for terrestrial 5G use is really one of the primary goals of this proceeding. How important, is it to get 12G into the spectrum pipeline, for the country's sort of desire to maintain its sort of wireless and spectrum leadership?
Look, I think it's very important. Let me just make a couple of points. One, if you look at the other bands of spectrum that are being considered, there are problems, particularly there are problems with federal users and how do you coordinate that? If you look globally, from the 1990s up through just a few years ago, I would say other countries look to the United States for leadership on spectrum policy. The reason that other countries adopted what we were doing is because it was working and Americans were better off. And you take this device, Jeff Bezos can use it, but also a poor person in India or Africa or China or anywhere in the world can use this. And they are just vastly better off. When American spectrum policy is bogged down, and I would say it's bogged down right now, when it gets bogged down, other countries stop looking at us. They sort of say, yeah, you're bogged down. They're going to look to other places for spectrum leadership. And that is not where the United States should be. We should be leading. And the way we're going to be leading is we have good folks like Scott Harris working on it, but we need to get things like the 12 gigahertz band moving. It's just being completely wasted right now.
Well, I would agree. I would say that we need to have a pipeline which is basically empty today for both domestic and global competitive reasons. Demand for wireless services or untethered services, whether commercial purposes, whether it be for mobile or for unlicensed, whatever the circumstance may be, I leave to the commission. But we need more wireless, commercial wireless spectrum for those purposes, and the pipeline is empty. If you think about it, I want to be respectful of what's happening on Capitol Hill. Are we going to, or are we not going to extend our auction authority? I am fully supportive of that. We got a couple more days. I suspect that they probably will. We've been part of that in the past life, and I've lived through it multiple times. We can do another stopgap to get to someday in May. But I want that to happen. I don't want it to miss. But in fairness, there's no auction's going to happen between now and May. And there's actually probably not an auction between now and the next couple of years. What's in the pipeline? Nothing. And then you can say, well, Mike, you ruined it. You auctioned all the spectrum when you were there. And that maybe the case may be, but part of the job is to have bands going forward. So it's not just about, and Scott talked about spectrum strategy. How do the next 10 years? How do we not only deal with the pipeline, but deal with a lot of the spectrum issues that my good friend talked about? So I absolutely think that 12 gigahertz can fill that immediate need that no one else can. I mean, lower 3 and 7, 8 is going to be heavy lifts, no matter how good my friends on Capitol Hill come to any resolution, if that's the case.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. We're looking ahead at the March meeting. There is no 12 gigahertz item on there, unfortunately. Hopefully, in the next couple of months, we'll see one. At that meeting, however, there is a new item in which the FCC is seeking comment to establish procedures. I want to make sure I get this right, for terrestrial licensees to receive supplemental coverage from satellite licensees for 5G handsets. Satellite operators collaborating with terrestrial service providers would gain FCC authorization to operate space stations on currently licensed flexible use spectrum allocated to those terrestrial services. Does this item have any implications, for 12 gigahertz? We talked about inferences earlier. Can we make any inferences about the ability of these providers to share spectrum? What do we take away from that item coming up in March?
Well, I think it's important to be developing new technologies such as this. I think all of that is positive. I think right now the technologies that are available it's going to be a very weak signal and very limited, but still potentially very valuable in an emergency situation. I think all of this is positive for 12 gigahertz because what it shows is the importance of, if you will, some form of complementarity between satellite-based services and terrestrial-based services, and I think that's the way it's going to be technologically going forward.
Yeah, I might agree. I think that the D2C or D2D, depending who you talk to on this item, I'm cautiously optimistic that it will be beneficial. I mean, I'm a little skeptical, not for the technology reasons, but in terms of its scope. That my friend, how big a market we're talking about, and we'll just have to see. The partnerships are being, developed as we speak, and some have already been announced. But I absolutely think it feeds to, and you mentioned the word inference, and my colleague as well. I absolutely think it proves the point that if you could have sharing between satellite and terrestrial wireless services, how is the opposite not true?
Sure.
So I think that, and the people who are advocating for it, kind of are proving my point and proving the point of the 12 gigahertz item, and so I think that's helpful for the overall cause.
Sure. We've got just a couple of minutes left. I've got one more question I want to ask, but if it's okay with you, I'd open it up to the floor and ask if there are any questions from the audience about 12 gigahertz, about what the future of this proceeding might possibly look like. Anyone interested in asking a question?
Who's awake?
What time is happy hour? No. Okay. So, well then, last question. To something you said earlier. This could, we've gone into year 3 in terms of soccer terms, right? If you're in the, if it's minute, 2.5, you're into minute 3. This is, the proceedings now been going on for a little over 2 years. We're into our 3rd year now. What actions, I guess, are you expecting, the FCC to take as it completes its analysis of this proceeding? What should we expect? Maybe when should we expect it? If you're just looking in the crystal ball.
I'm an optimist. I think the commission recognizes that this is low-hanging fruit, and that they will move forward. So I'm hopeful that the commission will move forward before too long.
Well, look, I'd like to believe most of the pieces that need to be done, you're not going to be able to see, and I won't see, and I couldn't even see in my old job. their their OET is finishing up its work, and hopefully that's been done probably months ago. And they went to the chairwoman's office, and they've been talking about what cuts to make on the policy side and deciding some of those pieces. And then have been, I hopefully optimistic, that they've asked the staff to draft the item and get it ready for meeting. And then they've already figured out when to pencil it in the grand scheme of things. So those are all things you're not going to see in the public side, and I wouldn't have seen as a commissioner until they said, okay, here's what's coming. So I hope that's the case. I'd like to believe that's the case, given the importance of this band, the need for a pipeline, the need for more wireless services for Americans. So I'd like to believe that's the case. Publicly, at some point, we're going to get a blog from the chairwoman, and that'll officially announce that the item's coming, and we'll go from there.
Sounds great. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate your insight. Thank you very much for spending the time talking about this. Appreciate everyone's attention. Please join me in thanking our guests.